Okay, it's varnishing day. First two clear coats of varnish. This is how it looks after I had put it in the drying box last night after the Copal seal coat. Nice color, nice ground color. So the first thing I did was mix up a 50-50 mix of my garnet and orange shellac. So I'm going to try that. The garnet is too brown, I think, and the orange is too light. That's alcohol to clean the brushes as I'm working. Here's the brush I use for the ribs in the back, the Da Vinci Spin 1 inch. And for the top, the Winsor & Newton Filbert. And a smaller one, a Zen Royal and Langnickel for the scroll. They worked out well. Okay, the first thing I do is put the varnish on the ribs, but I think the first thing I'm going to do here is very, very, very lightly sand, and not really sand, but just in case there are any nubs or particles on the seal coat, because I really don't want to cut through the seal coat. Okay, the 1 inch Da Vinci brush is wonderful. I also have a, well, the 1 inch is 30 millimeters, I think. And I have a little narrower one, but this works perfectly for the ribs because it's just about the same width as the ribs. And so I have the orange and garnet shellac, and it's laying down really, really well. Much better than I expected. I expected it to dry so fast that, you know, I'd get streaks or it would grab, but it doesn't. I think the spike oil, if I'm correct, is what keeps it from being too thin or drying too quickly. I'm not sure. But that's the orange and garnet mixed, because I thought the garnet was too dark and the orange is too light, so I mixed it 50-50 a little bit. I always will brush to the edges, any edges, not from the edges, because if you try to brush from the edges, you tend to get puddling. And so this brush works wonderfully for the ribs because it fits the ribs perfectly. And I make a point to try to also get under the overhang on both sides. The tricky thing is holding the violin. But so I'm working from kind of the middle of the lower bout towards that corner. Once again, you want to work towards edges and kind of fly off the edge so you get no puddling. But I'm loving how this is laying on. It will probably be a different story once I start adding colors, but the first two coats are just clear. So I've taken off the holding stick so I can get the bottom of the lower bout. Going across the end pin hole there. So I think it might have been a good idea to mix the orange and garnet shellac. Again, this is uncolored for the first two coats. Okay, now I'm going to work on the treble side of the ribs. The part that makes me a little bit more nervous is the front, The back is no problem because there's nothing to impede the brush. But on the front, you have the F-holes, of course, that you have to be very careful about brushing around. And always as I'm doing it, I'm checking to make sure I have no hairs. There were only about 2 or 3 times that I had a little hair. And I found the best thing to take the hair off is not the brush, because you might just still have that little piece of hair on the brush and it'll go on to the finish again, but to get it with your finger if you can. And I found when I was brushing, well, more so on the back and the front, I could go over, you know, spots if I do it quickly, and there would be no problems. But if you go over it too much, once it starts drying, then you're basically pulling off varnish, because the alcohol-based varnishes, basically they kind of melt into the previous coats. So I'm doing the edges of the corners, making sure I don't forget to do those. Now I think I'm gonna touch up the edges, I think, just to make sure no, I'm doing that rib. I guess I didn't do that side of the rib yet. The treble side. And I'm doing the edges there, kind of touching them, and then I kind of do a lengthwise swipe. So I'm dipping the brush usually into the varnish, and then I blot it a little bit on the paper towel because you don't want the brush dripping. Lighter is better, safer. At first I thought I might speed this up, but I think it's better not to in this case, so you can see actually, you know, the speed at which I am actually brushing this on. Gives you a better idea of how it goes. So I love brushing the varnish on the back because the flames just pop out. And it's going on very smoothly, so I'm brushing in the direction of the flames, touching at the edges, but then always kind of finishing it up by brushing towards the edges and off the edges to make sure nothing puddles up, and being careful of the corners, not to have too much finish on the brush when you're doing the corners, because again they could easily puddle up if you're not careful. And the C-bout, the recurve of the C-bout, you got to be careful of because it, you know, it dips down and it's kind of a channel there, so you want to kind of touch that up and then again brushing across off the edges. Constantly checking to make sure you're not missing any spots. But so far I'm loving this. I don't know how it will be when the color coats need to be put on. We'll see. This spirit varnish is totally new to me, but so far it's going smoothly, literally and figuratively. Oh, I thought I was using the other brush on the back, but I guess there's no real need to use that filbert brush on the back, as it's pretty flat. I mean, it's not flat, but you don't have to work into tricky areas like the F-holes. Checking for little hairs or mist spots. Okay, here I'm kind of washing the brush in the alcohol. Gonna go get the other brush, the filbert brush, the larger one, the Winsor and Newton one, so I can do the front. Double checking the back there for any hairs or any mist spots. Okay, now it's time to work on the front, which is a little more difficult because of the F-holes that kind of block your way. With the back, it's not as difficult because there's nothing that will block the brush. And then with the top, you have to go vertically with the grain as opposed to the back when you brush in the direction of the flames. Okay, so I started, I think I did kind of half the treble side, it looks like, down towards the top of the F-hole on that side, and then halfway towards the center line. And that seemed to work well. So once again, as I'm brushing towards an edge. So towards the top edge of the treble F-hole, and then along the inside of the F-hole. And as you can see, you can do the brush strokes several times before it starts drying or setting up. I'm trying to think of what to do. Okay, I decided now to go from the tail end of that side, the treble side, down towards the bottom F-hole edge. So I'm never brushing from the F-hole, but towards the edge of the F-hole. Once again, to avoid puddling. And keeping the brush fairly, not dry, but you don't want it dripping. So that's kind of a tricky thing to know exactly how much. So I dip it in there, and a lot of times I blot it on the paper towel to get rid of excess finish that might be on the brush. So now I'm kind of doing the middle of that half. And running down the middle, where I can run all the way from the neck end to the tail end without the F-hole blocking anything at that point. To get a nice vertical, continuous brush stroke there in the middle of the violin towards the center line. It's just around the F-holes that you have to be careful. I think I'm going along the side of the bass F-hole, not the eyes, because that's where you run into problems. The filbert brush is good because it can get into curves much better. You know, like the deep recurve on the outer edges of the C-bounce. Yeah, I was taking off a piece of hair, I think. Maybe I did do the bass side F-holes, but I was just doing it backwards from the tail first. Yeah, from the tail first down towards the bottom eye, then along the channel on the outer side of the bass C-bout, and then from the neck end to the upper eye. So I guess I was doing that. Now it's time to do the neck. First I do the heel area, and then the chin area, and then finally the scroll. So I'm using that smaller Zen Royal and Langnickel brush. It's narrow, more narrow than the filbert. So I'm doing the heel area first. Kind of making sure that the back button is totally finished, including the chamfer. The scroll area is tricky to finish just because of the way you have to hold the violin. I can't set it. I have to use that stick still so that the ribs and the edges don't touch anything. But sometimes you have to. You know what I could do is I could probably put a stool next to me that would be lower for the stick to rest upon. Because the scroll is kind of high for me when I set the stick on the workbench. And then you have to kind of hold it sideways for it to be at a good level for you to see and to brush. This is kind of a balancing act. You want to hold it firmly. You don't want the violin knocking against anything. So first I do the chin area, and then I do the side of the scroll where the tuner peg holes are, and now I work on the scroll, the volute and everything. And that you have to kind of be very careful. Have a very dry, pretty dry brush, because it's really easy for the varnish to puddle up in those, you know, little channels and in the volutes. But you do want to make sure to completely cover the volutes with the varnish, but not too thick because it will easily puddle in the little inside corners and all. So I do one side totally, and then I flip to the other side of the scroll. I like the faces I make while I'm while I'm doing this. Okay, now working on the other side of the scroll. Same thing, I do the sides where the tuner peg holes are. And then I do the volute area. Now I do the back side, the fluting, which is fairly easy to do. And the brush works really well to reach into that fluted back of the scroll, fluted back in the top. Again, working towards that edge, towards that chin, not from the chin. Now here I'm trying to hold it so that the violin doesn't touch anything. I like having that neck protector on the top of the neck surface because it makes the holding of the violin much easier when you have kind of a bigger handle. And so I have to reach also in underneath the scroll to get at the part where you can't really see. And then I have to do the sides of the, what do you call it? The peg box. You know, the tops of the walls on the sides of the peg box. I think that's what I'm doing right there. The tops of the walls of the peg box. Okay, now checking everything, making sure there's no hair, little hairs or missed spots. Coat number 1. Success. Now I'm going to go put it in the UV box. It's about 10:40 a.m. and I'll put it in the UV box for, oh, I don't know, an hour or so, because this dries pretty quickly.